Hey everybody, Joel from Rocktown. We're going to do a history of early mass-manufactured banjos starting about 1860, 1850, going up to about 1905, which means pre-Gibson, like the really, really old companies. Now, before I do the video, I just want to preface, if you're doing comments, that's great because a lot of the information I have is out of old books and there might be newer stuff and I'm happy to take a look at that. This is the best information I have at the time of the film. So take that with a grain of salt and hopefully you learned something. That's what it's about. We're going to start here with the instrument that really got me into banjos when I was about 17. I saw Bela Fleck play and I had to buy one. And by chance, I ran into one of the oldest Philadelphia makers, S.S. Stewart. And this is kind of what got me going. But what got the banjo going is in the 1850s was this song we've all heard. With a banjo on my knee. Anyway, that was the big song. And the early banjos we're going to start off with, the only one I'm not going to show you is in a book here. And this was a very early one by a guy named William Bosher. Now, the early instruments were all wood, so they didn't stay in tune and most of them didn't survive. Now, if we come over here a little bit, we'll talk about the major early manufacturers. The first one I played was a Stewart, which is actually much later. C. Bruno broke off into a lot of companies like the Martin Guitar Company and Ditson. Ditson, two of their main employees, John Haynes started Bay State, which started around 1855, 1860. A little bit before Lyon and Healy, George Washburn Lyon started that in the 1860s, and then the more successful line, originally it was just Lyon and Healy, but in the 1870s he started making instruments there called Washburns using his middle name, and then eventually they built a whole nother factory just for Washburn. And then they decided they wanted less expensive brands, so they bought a brand out of Indianapolis called Regal in 1902, and that became the less expensive Washburn line and Healy's. Also interesting is that out of Washburn, one of their top builders, William Schultz, started building harmonies, which became the biggest manufacturer by the 1960s. They started in 1892, again out of it. Now here are patents that are really important, Dobson and Washburn. So let's talk about some instruments. So the early ones, like I was showing you, are made of wood. So if we start over here, Dobson and Lyon and Healy / Washburn and Bruno were the first companies I could find that had these metal parts. What they did is the brackets allowed the instrument, the skin, to be tightened and in tune so it would not be a piece of wood that would rot or change with humidity. Also, the early 5 strings were based on a gourd instrument from Africa, simple like this, over wood, and didn't have frets because obviously there's no place for metal in Africa or early settlers in the United States. So Dobson later switched into frets. A bunch of the early companies like Washburn was really the first major manufacturer that could build their own metal as well as wood, which is why they're so important. So 5-string frets. Now the early ones, I just have an old example here. Now this is a ukulele banjo or banjo ukulele with, this is what it looks like from the back when they're not metal. These are metal ones. This is a Ditson. This, by the way, these two are that we're looking at are both, the banjo was so popular and the mandolin were the two most popular instruments, so they made an amalgam called the banjo mandolin. Again, Ditson with a hand painted, or actually not painted, this is wood. I've never seen another one, probably special order, turn of the century. This is also turn of the century harmony with a hand painted ship. Interestingly, harmonies and all the Martins early on, all of these tuners were made at Washburn for both of those companies because Washburn was so much bigger. So that's an interesting side thing. So over here we have a Bay State who is also from Oliver Ditson's company and probably made a lot of the C. Brunos. So this has the early serial number and the Bay State insignia, which George Washburn did the same thing. This is an early turn of the century. That, I've been told, kind of signifies 1890s. Not sure about that. These are some Washburn ukuleles here. This is a harmony. And they actually hired people to paint on the skins owls and also on the headstock. Now, Harmony and Washburn started doing these fancier resonators later on that make them sound a little better. So instead of being an open back like these, they have this. That's called a resonator. It really helps the improvement. Also, it's more comfortable on your leg. So the one I was playing early on is a 1880s, 1890s Stewart. Now these were Philadelphia. Stewart invented the many things, but the mandarin being the most important. And he did these fancy inlays, and he used a lot of brackets and really cool things to ornate. This is a presentation model. This is a more basic, affordable model, but not the entry one. Wouldn't have any of the inlays, and it would have less brackets. Another Ditson, another Harmony, kind of getting into the turn of the century. Interestingly, C. Bruno, after George Washburn died, attained the rights to Washburn again. This is probably a C. Bruno built by Fairbanks, most likely, or Lang, turn of the century. This is Lyon and Healy, which again was the parent company before George started to use his middle name. Then this is a very early, the earliest Regal I've seen with this inlay right here down at the bottom. That would puts it, I think, about 1910 or so. Very cool instrument. And then again, back to the Fairbanks company. So Fairbanks was super important. That spun off into Vega. And a really important builder there, his name was William Lang. He started the Orpheum and the Paramount companies. These are beautiful rock maple 5-string banjos. They're beautiful, beautiful instruments. So by the 50s, most of the companies were gone. The ones that were making these plastic ones. Harmony actually made a really cool electric one right before they closed up. And the only company that really survived is the Washburn Company. All these other guys kind of went away. So if you want a new Washburn, I highly recommend Washburn from rocktownmusic.net, because the techs there set these up to play great. Super important. Hope you learned something. Like and subscribe.